This is why the first job you have is extremely important. I'll speak for myself. My first job was a financial planner at Prudential, and I spent 10 years there doing investment and insurance planning for individual and family clients. The most important takeaway I would say from that experience was learning the fundamentals of business and entrepreneurship. What I mean by that more specifically is when I transitioned to start Revere, a lot of the actual product or service is naturally different than my previous profession, but a lot of the underlying themes as far as business development, personal business growth, etc., are all derived from those experiences at Prudential, the first occupation that I'd had. These are the 6 biggest takeaways that I took from my first job that I now have incorporated into my business practices currently. First and foremost is mentorship. It's very, very important to find like-minded individuals, typically and preferably people a little farther along in the process and a little bit more experienced in business, and really just gravitate toward them, learn their ways. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. So I would suggest learning from a mentor, taking it, and then running with it with your own flavor, your own taste, your own twist. But the concepts are still very much the same as it's always been. The second has definitely been work ethic. I was raised with a good work ethic. My father's, long-term military, and there was a lot of individuals around me, coworkers, peers, doing the same profession that I was doing that didn't have quite the same work ethic. And I noticed over just a few years that their results and mine differed substantially, and it primarily differed directly correlated to that amount of work ethic that I had above and beyond my peers. That gave me a lot of encouragement, and it really showed me that hard work does pay off, and it can be a tangible result that you see. I would say the third would be the art of selling. So in any sales profession, and it goes back again, the underlying concepts and themes are all very much the same, regardless of the product or service that you're offering. So I learned a lot being in so many sales scenarios. I was cold calling, I was doing a lot of first meet and greets, networking, sitting down with individuals, talking about very sensitive information, their personal finances. And the art of selling is really, for me, been a direct result of how I've created my own art style of selling. Has definitely been a result of my experience, a lot of practice, and slowly navigating through the psychology of selling and structuring questions open-ended and really leading down a road with the client around their underlying goals and objectives. Because oftentimes, it's commonly understood that you'll get an objection and it sounds like, oh, it's too costly, or whatever the excuse is. Typically, what I found in my experience in the art of selling is that what they're saying isn't always necessarily their underlying concern. Their underlying concern is usually something deeply seated, and learn the proper line of questioning to get to that true objection, because once you do, you can approach and address that objection specifically, and that's most likely going to be the way to turn a client from a prospect into a customer. The next I would say would be, the fourth would be the 80-20 rule. So 80% of your results professionally typically come from the top 20% of activities. Another way of saying that is find a way to spend the majority of your time in the top 20% of activities, and either delegate the rest, do the rest on the weekends, come in early and do paperwork. Spend the majority of your time in the top 20% of activities. What you'll find is that your results will exponentially increase. And number 5 is scaling a business. So I learned the way that our corporate structure was in my first profession was very much sort of franchisee, hire within, hire underneath, get a team around you and operate on an override. So I learned, and from a mentor specifically that comes to mind, what it takes to scale a business, how to improve process, how to template, and try to figure out a way in which every time I spent putting together a report, a PowerPoint, a thorough email, is there a way to template that so that when I do that same activity again, it's going to be much more efficient, much quicker. And lastly, when I'm looking at scaling, it usually has a lot to do with delegation, meaning get people around you, get like-minded individuals where you can share on the tasks, so collectively you're producing more than just by yourself. So the sixth would be make sure that you have plenty in the pipeline. This is the easiest way to differentiate amateurs from professionals. When you're in a sales environment, and most professions are some version of sales, that's just my personal opinion, make sure you have enough in the pipeline. That way, you can present yourself in a certain way with clients. You're not presenting yourself as being desperate. You're not creating a sense of pressure on the client. And in reality, you're just there to serve a need. Timing business is the sales business. It's all about timing. And what's most important is if you have enough in the pipeline, if you have enough contacts that are ready to convert into clients, it doesn't necessarily matter if one particular individual or client or customer says no, because you have plenty other to choose from. Or it may not be a no, it may be just a not yet. And instead of applying too much pressure, you can pause, let them know no problem, I'll reach out to you in a few months, knowing that you have a full pipeline. And then guess what happens in a few months? They realize a couple of things. One, that their timing is now, they're now available to make that decision. And then also, and equally as important, is they've now viewed you in a different light. They've viewed you as a resource and a consultant and somebody there to fill a need that they're looking to fill, and not somebody pressuring a sale. So your first job doesn't necessarily need to be a career job. It could be in retail, it could be, a hostess or a waiter at a restaurant. The real takeaway from that would be is you're around coworkers, you're able to see the business operations from the inside, right? You have, employee break rooms, and you have paperwork that you have to sign. And then also you're paying attention to the clientele that are coming in, either, again, the scenarios of retail or being a waitress or a waiter. That latter example of being a waiter or a waitress, I think there's so much about the psychology of selling with being a waiter or waitress. I'll give you an example. Tips, right? The majority of waiters or waitresses, let's say a first job. Now, there are many people that make a career out of it, and it's great. If you're one of those people that are using it as a stepping stone to get into, say, corporate America from being a waiter or waitress, what you'll find is the majority of your earnings will come from tips. Now, how do we get great tips? Well, if you work backwards, it's making sure that the customer or the client is happy, satisfied, that their expectations are accurate and met, and that you're, friendly and social. All of those correlate to sales. So welcoming them in, having a smile on your face, asking, what it is that we can do to start or to make sure that their time here is satisfactory, and then, just checking back in with them. All of these different nuances in psychology or in interpersonal communication can absolutely be transferred into a sales role or any sort of corporate America field, because what you're doing is, at the end of the day, people buy for three reasons, and in this exact order. First, they buy you, then they buy the product, and then they buy the company. So what that means is you're always selling yourself. In retail, when you're offering, help to a customer, when you're, working at a trade show and you're trying to introduce yourself and your product to anybody walking by, all of these things really boil down to, can you improve your likability, your interpersonal communication skills, and the ability to know what it means to follow up. Regardless of what your first job is, remember the importance of how it will shape the fundamentals of your professional development for the rest of your life.